Once upon a time, there was a young man who had recently moved to a bustling metropolis. Due to his limited budget, he had no choice but to rent an apartment in an aging building located in a less than desirable part of the city. Upon entering his new apartment, he was greeted by a rather sorry sight. The floor was covered in dusty, stained carpets, the chair in the corner was on the verge of collapse, and the wallpaper seemed determined to peel away from the walls. Undeterred by the initial state of disarray, he decided to roll up his sleeves and embark on a mission to spruce up his humble abode. While tearing off a section of peeling wallpaper, he stumbled upon an unexpected discovery: a small hole in the wall. Curiosity piqued, he peeked through the hole and realized that he could see into his neighbor's apartment, which appeared to be vacant at the moment. Without giving it much thought, he decided to cover the hole with a piece of tissue paper and got back to cleaning. The following evening, as he entered the elevator, he was joined by a stunning woman with shapely legs and a captivating figure. He'd found it hard to avert his gaze as they ascended the building. To his surprise, she exited the elevator on the same floor as him. As he walked down the corridor, he noticed that she was entering the apartment next to his. It dawned on him that she was his neighbor. Back in his apartment, the young man couldn't help but think about his beautiful neighbor. Temptation got the best of him, and he decided to sneak a peek through the hole in the wall once more. To his delight, he had a perfect view of her apartment. He watched as she undressed, unaware of his voyeuristic gaze. However, his excitement turned to disappointment when she turned off the lights and retired to bed. In the middle of the night, he was awakened by faint groans emanating from the neighboring apartment. His curiosity got the better of him, and he couldn't resist taking another look through the hole. What he witnessed horrified him. A tall man standing over the young woman, wielding a long, menacing knife. The woman writhed in pain, lying in a pool of her own blood. The young man was paralyzed with shock, unable to move a muscle. Before he could react, the murderer delivered a final fatal blow, and the woman's groans ceased. The killer hastily gathered his belongings and exited the apartment, glancing back at the young man as he closed the door behind him. The young man's heart pounded, and he knew he had to act quickly. Rushing into his bedroom, he grabbed his phone with trembling hands, ready to call the police. But then, a sudden wave of fear washed over him. If he reported what he had witnessed, it would be revealed that he had been spying on his neighbor through the hole in the wall. The shame and embarrassment of his voyeurism would become public knowledge among his friends and family. In that moment of agonizing indecision, he made a fateful choice. He placed the phone on his bedside table, never to call the police. The next evening, when he returned from work, he found the police waiting at his door. They informed him of his neighbor's murder and began asking him questions about the previous night. Despite the fear that gripped him, he maintained his story of having slept through the incident, even though he knew it was a lie. As the police left, seemingly accepting his explanation, the young man felt a mix of relief and guilt. He couldn't forget what he had witnessed, but the burden of his voyeuristic past weighed heavily on him. He sealed the hole in the wall, installed new locks and a deadbolt on his door, and tried to move on with his life. Weeks passed, and the memory of the murder began to fade from his mind. He saw news reports about the unsolved case, but felt a growing sense of detachment. Until one night, when he was jolted awake by the sound of groaning, coming from the apartment next door. His heart raced as he recalled that the apartment had been vacant since the murder. Trembling, he removed the paper covering the hole in the wall, peering through it to investigate the source of the eerie sounds. At first, he saw nothing but darkness, but then he noticed a wide-open, bloodshot eye staring back at him. He recoiled in horror, frozen in fear, as the grotesque eye remained fixed on him. Then, a raspy voice from the other side of the wall whispered, "I know you saw..." A few years ago, there was a man named Mark who had recently moved into his own apartment in the city. Mark decided to live alone so that he could concentrate on his studies and avoid the distractions of college life. However, as time went on, he began to notice something strange. Upon returning from university, Mark would often find that the curtains in his bedroom were mysteriously closed, even though he distinctly remembered leaving them open in the morning. Other times his belongings seemed to have been rearranged or disappeared altogether. These incidents began to bother him. One day, Mark decided to share his worries with his close friends, Sarah and Mike, and they met at a coffee shop to discuss the situation. "Maybe I'm worrying too much," Mark began, "but I can't shake the feeling that someone is entering my apartment during the day when I'm not home." Sarah raised an eyebrow and Mike listened, intrigued. Rearranging curtains and moving things around. Who would do that? Mike wondered. Sarah nodded in agreement, but then added, "You might have an unwanted admirer or stalker. We have to consider all options." Mark hesitated for a moment, contemplating the situation. What should I do? Should I contact the police? Mike shrugged. "I doubt the police will spend much time on that without concrete evidence of a break-in or damage to your property." Sarah stepped into the conversation. "Mike's right, but we can't just ignore your concerns. How about setting up a hidden camera in your bedroom and recording what goes on during the day? If you really do have an intruder, you'll have proof for the police." "That's a great idea," Mark exclaimed. "It'll either calm me down or help me catch whoever is behind it." Mike didn't miss a chance to joke, "And if it turns out you're just paranoid, you can show the tape to your future therapist." That night, Mark borrowed a video camera from Sarah and set it up surreptitiously in the bedroom, hiding it among the study materials. The next morning, he started the recording before leaving for his studies and soon forgot about it, preoccupied with his classes. He only remembered about the camera when he got home in the evening. Mark pulled out the device and called Sarah. "Hi Sarah," he said. "I'm back home. I'm going to check the tape now." "Don't break the connection," Sarah replied. "Tell me if you see anything." Mark pressed the play button on the camera and started watching the tape. He saw him leave for school in the morning and close the bedroom door. There was no one in the room. Mark rewound the tape, examining for activity, but nothing significant showed up. "I can wait," Sarah assured him. "There's nothing to watch on TV right now anyway." Mark continued to watch the tape and suddenly exclaimed, "Oh my God, there's someone there." Sarah approached, her interest mixed with anticipation and anxiety. "What's going on?" Mark described the figure he saw on the screen. "It's a woman. She's come into my room." "What is she doing?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with a mixture of anticipation and anxious foreboding. Mark stared at the screen unwaveringly. "She's going around, closing the door. Right now she's checking the trash. It's so weird. And she's picking up my stuff and sniffing it. It's disgusting." Sarah shuddered at the thought. "Do you recognize her? Have you seen her before?" Mark strained to get a better look. "No, I don't recognize her at all. She has long black hair and she's holding a big kitchen knife. Now she's gone into my closet." Sarah asked him to rewind the tape to see what the woman was doing next. As they continued to watch, nothing happened in the room. "You know what that means, right?" Mark said, joy and relief in his voice. "I have proof now. We can go to the police." Sarah agreed, her mind boiling. "Alex will be shocked. He didn't believe you, but I did. You're lucky we sealed it on video." Mark pressed the play button again, watching himself as he went home, and turned off the camera. "Let's go to the police station," he said. "I'll meet you at the coffee shop in 15 minutes. Mark took the camera and headed out, but a sense of unease remained inside him. "Wait a minute," Sarah said, her voice shaking a little. "You mentioned that the woman went into the closet. Did she ever come out of there?" A shiver ran down Mark's back as he realized he hadn't paid attention to that detail. He hurried to check the tape, but there was no activity in the room. "She didn't come out," he whispered, his heart racing. When they reached the cafe, Mark and Sarah prepared to head to the police station, but they never made it there. Later that evening, authorities discovered Mark's body covered in numerous stab wounds. A video camera was found in his cold dead hand, but the memory card with the evidence was gone. The mystery woman was never found, and her gruesome presence remained an unsolved mystery. Any area of human activity contains mysteries. Different cases, incidents that cannot be explained by the usual logic. They are components of some common mystical mosaic. People just want to believe that the fire, a living being rebelling against the oppression of man's fierce fires, that the subway has abandoned tunnels leading to unknown places, that many high-rise buildings have extra floors, which cannot be reached by conventional means, that if an ancient music box plays a strange tune, then in no case should not look out the window. These are all scary bedtime stories that serve as material for urban legends. You can tell them anywhere and anyone, but most of all told by those who regularly face death face to face. Whether you believe them or not is up to you. But sometimes, during a terrifying nighttime thunderstorm, it's worth remembering a few details. Close all doors, drape windows and mirrors, unplug electronics, and wait out that rain. I put my hands under the running water and thoroughly scrub them with soap and another special disinfectant. The bloody gloves lie there, emitting the unpleasant odor of fresh rubber. It's not what most people imagine. The room allotted to me is not a gloomy basement where the ceiling presses down on your head and the walls try to close behind you. It is bright and spacious. A lot of fluorescent lamps under the ceiling emit a pleasant to the eye bluish light. The white tile on the walls makes the room feel even more spacious. Except, I don't like the smell. The disinfectant used to clean the floor emits a pungent, sweet, almost floral scent that makes me nauseous. The silence is strange, but at the same time soothing. As long as the room is quiet, I can be sure that no one is behind me. It helps keep me from going crazy. How inordinately long the night shift drags on. Just because it's night doesn't mean it's the quietest. The corpse truck regularly brings in stiff bodies. Like the guy I just washed my hands after. I mean, he probably wasn't even 20 years old. And he won't be. Ever. Cause of death was cortical damage. I can't believe I'm writing this crap. What cortical damage when a piece of rusty rebar blew half his skull off? They'll bury him in a closed casket. I don't think anyone will be able to reshape the rest of his skull. But that's none of my business. I do autopsies, not cosmetology on dead flesh. It's probably a lucrative business. There's a storm coming. I can always feel it. Besides, I can see everything through the window, located under the ceiling and overlooking the sidewalk. Droplets hit the glass, which is already shaking from the thunder. There's a flash of lightning. God, it's so long. The square inside the window frame bursts into flames, turning simply white for a second. This glow outside my window I absolutely hate. I see the same on every fall, but I still hope it doesn't happen again. I don't know what this phenomenon means. All I have is the bare consequence, no cause. Murders. Strange murders. They only happen in thunderstorms. October through December, most of the time. A big night storm, we get fresh bodies and very unusual corpses. I try not to be surprised by anything anymore, but every time these fall bodies shock me to the core. Last year, there were several cases like this, almost all in November. It wasn't my shift, and I didn't have to do an autopsy. But I was watching from the sidelines. On the autopsy table lay a young man in a tattered leather jacket, so soaked with blood that it oozed from the lining if you put your finger on it. Lacerations covered his entire body from top to toe. One arm was torn clean off, the other twisted at an unnatural angle. A bone fragment sticking out, an open fracture. The face, covered with dried blood, is unnaturally twisted. I won't go into anatomical details, but all of the above is just a fraction of the damage. It was hard to even determine what exactly caused death. Certainly not from a heart attack, since the heart was ripped out of his chest while it was still beating. I sense this storm will bring some more grim gifts. If only it weren't on my shift. Let it be the most ordinary thunderstorm, after which one can breathe so freely and the sky shines with purity and optimism. I hear voices. They're far away, but they're getting closer. There is a rhythmic, creaking sound added to the human words. Sure enough, the rubber wheel of a gurney rubbing against the tile. The doors swing open and drunken orderlies pile into the room, one of them pushing a gurney in front of him with a sheet thrown over it. She's covered in blood. All of it. Here you go, Doc, first birdie of the night. I sign the log, and we move the body to the autopsy table together. The guys leave, squinting at the sheet-covered corpse. Something spooked them. It's not easy to scare the staff of any morgue. I lift the edge of the sheet. Deja vu. Only this time it's a girl. Very young. Her heart ripped out, her body mutilated beyond recognition. Sweetie, what were you doing out on the street at night? In a thunderstorm? All alone? You can't do that. You have to think with your head sometimes. The body was so badly mutilated that if the killer had made a little more effort, it would have fallen apart. The cuts are so deep that many of them go all the way through, tearing through the skin on the other side. What kind of strength and weapon would it take to inflict such terrible blows? A sharpened axe? A sword? No, none of these are suitable. The weapon surprisingly combined the razor sharpness of a razor with the piercing qualities of a hammer. A club with nails hammered into it? Nonsense, nonsense. I pull a pack of disposable gloves out of my locker and struggle to pull on the stiff rubber. The medical lamp is ready, the scalpel sparkles in the bluish light of the lamps. The autopsy is ready. The blade slices through the remains of the blouse and the blood-soaked rags fall to the floor. The heart was cut out very unprofessionally. Maybe the tools were blunt or something. You could say it was just ripped out in one sharp movement, but a simple man wouldn't have the strength to do such a thing. 2 furrows that tore the stomach apart. Or maybe, no, it looks like it, but it couldn't have been a predator. I've seen tiger claw marks and teeth marks. We had a tiger trainer brought in once. The wounds were much smaller, 3 times smaller at least. But here, the claw must be 30 centimeters long and 10 at the base. Otherwise, it'll break. Human bodies aren't as soft as you might think. Only in this case, the ribs are broken and the cut goes further. The killer didn't even use any extra force to break the bone. Chirp, and a giant scratch split the left lung, stomach, spleen, met intestines, and ended up in the middle of the thigh. Bros. I feel like a rookie practitioner being given a scalpel for the first time. The nausea creeps closer and closer. I'm afraid I won't be able to hold it in. When the body was placed in one of the refrigerators, I breathed more freely. My stomach is empty and still cramping. My shift ends in a few minutes. But I'm not leaving here. No. If I have to, I'll stay here till morning. But no force can push me out into the rain. There's something worse than wet cats out there. I'm sure of it. I have to act like pigeons, to crawl anywhere, into any crevice, but not to be under the slanting and cold jets of this prolonged downpour. I have a strange feeling about this. I'm almost home, the fear is over, and I have 2 weekends ahead of me. I can just lie on the couch and watch something light on TV. No blood or violence. I'm so sleepy, like crazy. But something's bothering me more and more, and it's a feeling that can't be banished or displaced. It's eating away at my soul, stabbing me with sharp spikes of fear. Slowly, one by one. Why doesn't anyone notice it? What happens in the rain? Is it possible to write it off year after year as a coincidence? Or coincidence? No, but no one seems to care. No one seems to care, except for the relatives of the murdered who receive in a wooden box something mangled, in pieces. My wife stretches sweetly, sluggishly reacting to my presence. Are you all right, honey? I'm fine, honey. How's the weather? I don't know. I slept. I had such dreams. She closes her eyes again. But I can't sleep. Fear prevents me from closing my eyes. I go out into the hallway, desperately trying to figure out what's bothering me. Timmy. His room is empty. Even the bed is made. I can feel the cold sweat running down my back. Annie, where's Tim? Where is he? She wakes up instantly, and my horror is immediately reflected in her eyes. He went for a walk this evening, but I thought he'd come back. It's been a particularly rainy November. My cabin in the deep forests of Alaska has always been my refuge from the hustle and bustle of the world, where the roar of engines and city noise gave way to the whisper of the wind and the chirping of birds. Here I enjoyed solitude, far from city lights and the hustle and bustle of civilization. In winter, when the world was quiet under a dense blanket of snow, this place became especially cozy. Outside the window, the snow slowly formed its crystal landscape like magic, and I preferred to spend evenings by the fireplace, reading old books or gazing into the fire, which seemed like a living conversational companion. And then one evening, as the snow was falling like a feather, I heard something unusual knock at the door, a sound I hadn't heard in a long time. I rose from my chair, my heart beating faster, and cautiously opened the door. A stranger stood before me, exhausted and frozen, his face pale from the cold, and his clothes soaked to the skin from the snow. He whispered, "I am sorry to disturb you, but I am lost in the woods and have sought shelter from the blizzard. May I come in and warm up at least a little?" His eyes burned with desperation, and despite the strangeness of the situation, I felt I couldn't leave him out in the cold. My cabin was the only shelter in this forest for miles. I let him inside, and he began to slowly thaw out by the fireplace. Then we got to talking. It turned out that this stranger was a hunter, and he had lost his way while hunting. His gear had been lost, and he was seeking shelter from a furious blizzard that had suddenly started. We spent the evening swapping stories and telling each other about our lives. The stranger proved to be a pleasant and interesting conversationalist, and I began to feel a connection with him, even though it was only one night. At one point, I suggested he stay at my place until morning to avoid a night out in this harsh winter. He agreed, and I provided him with a sleeping space in the guest room. The night passed peacefully, and in the morning, I prepared breakfast for both of us. We enjoyed a warm meal and pleasant conversation, but as time went on, I noticed that the stranger was becoming increasingly restless. He would go outside several times and look toward the woods as if waiting for something. Hours went by, and he never returned. My anxiety began to build. I decided to check what was going on and headed to his room. But he wasn't there anymore. On the table was a note in which he apologized for his hasty disappearance and said he would be back soon. He also added that I could leave his things alone. At first I decided to trust his words and waited. However, hours passed and he never returned. My anxiety increased. I started looking all over the cabin for him, hoping he had just slept over or was lost inside the house. But he was nowhere to be found. That's when I decided to go outside to look for his footprints. The snow remained deep and fluffy, and I could easily see footprints on its surface. Suddenly, I noticed red spots that led me towards the woods. At first, I couldn't figure out what those tracks were. Then it hit me. It looked like blood. My anxiety turned to panic. Fearing for this man's life, I decided to follow those red footprints, hoping they would lead me to him. But along with each step deeper into the forest, my anxiety only grew. The indescribable cold and blizzard made my path increasingly difficult, but I couldn't stop. Eventually, the patches led me to a terrible sight. There, amidst the snow and forest vegetation, lay the breathless body of the stranger I had taken into my home. It was covered with blood, and a blizzard had brought a great layer of snow that covered it. I immediately called the police, and the officers arrived at the cabin, beginning an investigation. It turned out that this stranger was not who he appeared to be. His real name was Mark West. and he had been convicted of serious crimes, including robbery and trespassing. In his fugitive status, taking refuge in my house was a last-ditch effort to avoid being caught. The police launched a wide-ranging investigation to understand how Mark West ended up in my cabin, and what links there might be between him and local criminal gangs. A study of his background revealed numerous crimes, and by all appearances, he was a true professional in the world of crime. While the police were investigating, I couldn't help but think about how close I was to being victimized by this dangerous man. My kindness and willingness to help him could have cost me my life if it hadn't turned out that he was a fugitive.